Alright, welcome everybody to another dojo class. This one is going to be EWAR 101, so I'm going to cover general information about EWAR, the different types of EWAR in the game, and the different ships that are bonus to each type. And I'll be showing you, of course, a couple fits for some of the basic ships that are more Nubo friendly. So with a quick overview, EWAR stands for, or is short for Electronic Warfare. Basically anything that anything in the game that you can do to debuff an enemy, aside from killing them, is considered electronic warfare. Just think of them as like debuffers in typical RPG sense. That being said, they don't deal damage. None of the EWARs deal damage, but they are force multipliers, which means having them on field will make the rest of your fleet do more damage, or will make the enemies do less damage. It really depends on the type, but they're buff or debuff modules. EWAR is pretty crucial to every single fleet. Like, there's no fleet that could not be made better by adding EWAR to it, really. EWAR is often kind of overlooked in terms of a play style because it doesn't get, like, you don't do damage, so it might feel like you're not doing a lot. And you're also not healing allies like Logi are, so they might not be super grateful to you like they are to Logi. But EWAR is absolutely crucial in every fleet. I said it in the ping already, but I'll say it again. Usually, the EWAR that goes along with each fleet doctrine is one of the single most important ships in the entire fleet on a ship-by-ship basis, more than the DPS and more than the Logi. Probably not more important than the FC, but anyway. So that's the general information about it. Now there's a bunch of different types in the game, so I'm going to be going through every single type. I'm going to show you the module, explain what it does, and then also explain which ships are bonus to that module or go well with that module, and I'll try to give you a fit for it, but I don't have fits for the more advanced ships. Before we get started, does anyone have any general questions about EWAR? Cool. All right, so the first one that we're going to go over is ECM. I just linked it in Fleet. Throughout this class, I'm going to be linking a bunch of stuff in Fleet, so just be watching Fleet chat. So that's a ECM module. Now what ECM does is you target a ship, use the ECM module on them, and then if you're successful, then that target will be unable to lock anything except you, which means if you lock the enemy Logi, they can't rep their allies. If you lock an enemy DPS, they can't DPS your fleet. If you lock tackle, or if you jam tackle, then the tackle can't tackle anything except you. So ECM is kind of generally the strongest form of electronic warfare in a sense because it just makes someone unable to target anything except you. It actually used to be that if you landed the jam successfully, then they couldn't target anyone, but that was a little too strong, especially in 1v1 situations. So they nerfed it, so now the victim can target the jammer. But it's still very valuable, especially in fleets if you can jam out Logi. That's the main use of ECMs in fleets. Now if you actually open up the ECM module and show info, and then go to Attributes tab, scroll all the way down, and under all the rest of the information about it, you'll see ECM Jammer Strength. Now, there's 4 different colors here, which correspond to the 4 different types of sensors. So each ship has a color of sensor. Can everybody open their fitting window right now? And look under the targeting subsection on the very right. The very first thing in that subsection should be some circles that have either red, yellow, blue, or green color, and then it'll say, X amount of points, like 5 points or 10 points or whatever. It's different for different ships. But that's your sensor strength. And the color next to it indicates your sensor type. So if you look back at the ECM module, you'll see it has 1.2 strength for everything except blue. So that means that against blue, it will have a 3.6 strength, and against the other types of sensors, it will have a 1.2 strength. The actual value of the strength is used to calculate how likely you are to jam out the target, and it's just a yes or no. There's no in between. The way that that's calculated is pretty simple. You just take the strength that you're applying, divide it by the target's sensor strength, and that's your chance to jam them out. So if you have strength equal to or higher than your target's sensor strength, you're guaranteed going to jam them out every single time. If you have lower than that, then it's just a percentage chance. Keep in mind also that you can heat these modules and they will increase the strength. Usually you're going to want to heat in jam ships because you have quite a bit of heat to go. If you do get a successful jam off, they last 20 seconds. So, for 20 seconds that target can't target anything else except you, unless you die. So that's the blue jam. And the color, as we mentioned earlier, is the way you determine, the color of the ship is the way you determine what sensor strength it has. All Caldari ships use blue sensors. All Galente ships use green sensors. Minmatar uses red, and Amara uses yellow. So I'm going to link the other races' jams here in a second. You don't really have to memorize the names, but blue for Caldari is called gravimetric. Yellow for Amar is Ladar. Magnetometric is Galente, and it's green. I think I'm missing one somewhere. Radar is Amar, and Ladar is Minmatar. Don't go by the names because they're retarded. I don't know why they made two so similarly sounded. Just go by the color. There's also two special types of jammers. I'm going to link both of them here. So the burst jammer is a special type of ECM. It's not bonus to any specific race. It has the same strength for all races. And it's not a targeted thing. It's when you activate it, it jams everyone, or it tries to jam everyone within 12 kilometers of your ship. So it doesn't matter how many ships there are, it'll apply to all of them. And it'll apply that ECM jammer strength you see on the show info screen for that. And that one lasts 30 seconds. So this one's more of a AoE jam, basically, instead of a targeted jam on a single target. The target spectrum breaker is a pretty rare module these days. It's a battleship and above. Basically what it does is the more people that are targeting you, the lower or the higher chance it has to jam out all your aggressors. And it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, but I'm not going to go into it because nobody uses it anyway. Right, so the ECM bonus, so that's the module and how ECM works. The ECM bonus ships are, of course, going to be Caldari. Caldari's sort of, each race has a special type of EWAR that they specialize in. ECM is Caldari's specialty, so here's a, I don't know, here's a random Griffin fit. You can customize the colors of the ECMs however you want, but generally EWAR ships don't have weapons either, so it's just focused on some ECM strength and stuff like that. Then there's a Tech 2 ECM ship for Caldari. There it is. It's called the Kitsune. You can click on that and go to the traits, and you'll see that it gets a bunch of bonuses to ECM target. Strength, reduction activation cost, increase in optimal range for jammers. So it's really pretty nasty ship if you're trying to jam things out. The jams are very strong on that ship when you bonus them up. That is about it for EWAR. I mean for ECM. Does anyone have any questions about ECM? Yeah, so target priority usually in fleet fights is going to be Logi, because that's the most effective thing you can do. Usually they don't have that many Logi, And especially if they're cap chaining logi, like Ospreys or Bazzies, you jam out one, you fuck up their whole cap chain. So generally in fleet fights, if you have ECMs, just put them on the enemy logi. That applies to if you're not an ECM ship, but you have ECM drones. Those work the same way as ECM. Just put them on enemy logi ships. Occasionally, the FC might ask you to put them on a specific ship, but it's pretty rare because logi is almost always the best target. Oh, that kind of just comes from experience. You can always ask the FC, but you kind of just have to memorize which ships are logi and which are not. There's no really easy way to tell at a glance when you're in a battle. But before you actually start the fight, your FC, you should know what the enemies are flying from your scouts. And if someone posts a D-scan in your EWAR, you can just ask in the fleet who's logi. Yep. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so don't activate all your ECM on the same target at once. And the reason is because if you jam someone out, there's no reason to add any more. They don't stack. All it will do is kind of extend the duration a little bit. So the best practice for ECM is to throw out one jam, wait to see if it hits, and you'll know if it hits because like under the targeting icon, when you lock a target, their picture shows up and their health and stuff, and underneath their picture, you can see what modules you're using against them. Well, when you use ECM, if the jam hits, the little icon of the jammer under their target picture will be bright and like colorful. And if your jam missed, the picture will be faded and like translucent. So basically, just activate your first one, check if it worked. If it worked, then move on to a different target. But keep in mind that the jam only lasts 20 seconds. So, if you jam one target and then move on, and then forget about the first one, it's possible that your second jam on him is going to fail, and then he'll be unjammed. I know it got nerfed. I think it's still. Oh yeah, that was drones. Because it was really stupid when drones could keep ECM forever. Any other questions about ECM? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, good question. This applies to all EWAR. Well, most EWAR. EWAR generally is very long range. Like in these Kitsune or Griffin fits, you can usually jam out to at least 100 kilometers. And you have no tank, and you're a frigate, so you're super squishy. So in like huge fleets, like Stratop or more than 15, 20 people in a fleet, you probably still want to stay with the main fleet just so you don't get caught out. But in anything smaller than that, you kind of want to fly your own ship, have a lot of pings, warp around. Don't let any tackle get anywhere close to you. And if you start getting hit by anything, just warp off. So it depends, basically. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next type of EWAR, which is target painting. This one's pretty simple. I've linked the painter there in Fleet. All it does is activate on a target, and it increases their signature radius, makes them a lot easier to hit, or makes missiles apply to them better. That's all it does. They usually have a pretty long range, just like ECM. They have a long fall off as well, but if you go outside optimal, the effect is reduced, as is with all modules. That's pretty much it for target painting. The ships that are good for target painting are Minmatar ships. That's Minmatar specialty. So the Tech 1 is the Hyena, or sorry, Tech 1 is the Vigil. You can look at its bonuses and see it gets bonuses to target painting strength and range. The Tech 2 one is the Hyena here, and while it does get bonuses to painting, its main bonuses is to the web. which I'll explain later. But basically, usually the Tech 2 Logi frigates, or the Tech 2 EWAR frigates of each race have an additional bonus, not just the base one. Painting is pretty much useful in every fleet because making the enemies easier to hit is always useful, but it's especially useful in alpha fleets, which is where you use artillery projectile turrets and you all shoot at once and delete the enemy before this Logi can rep him. Because they generally don't have very good tracking, and making the target easier to hit and easier to delete in one shot is very useful there. Any questions about painting? Cool. Oh, go ahead. Yes, because what it directly does is it bonuses or it blooms their signature radius, and signature radius is a factor in lock time. So if you paint them and then someone tries to lock them, they'll be a little faster, but it's not that much, to be honest. Yes, actually, and this is a pretty big factor in EWAR. This applies to all EWAR modules. Additional EWAR modules of the same type on the same target will have a decreased effectiveness. There's a what's it called? Diminishing returns. Basically, the first module that you apply, like the first paint, for example, it will do 100% efficiency. So if if the description says it blooms 30%, it'll bloom 30%. The second one has 87%. The third paint has 57%. The fourth paint has 28%. And below that, it's basically nothing. So, if you think about it, by the time you put the fourth paint on them, the fourth one's only about a quarter effective. So not particularly useful at that point. Yep, it's the same sort of stacking penalty that applies to all modules that give like a percentage change to something. It's not just flat addition of percentage. And almost all EWAR uses this. Like, of course, ECM doesn't because ECM is not like a percentage change. It's just a jam or no jam. But everything else follows this. Any other questions about painting? All right, cool. Moving on to the next one, it's webs. Webs, I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with webs, but I'm going to post one anyway. When you use a web... So that it's not tick specifically, because it does calculate at the beginning of every tick, but if someone starts locking a target and then you paint him, then the target locking will be sped up. The speed is recalculated every single tick based on your scan res and the target's sig radius. Yep. Oh, I should also mention, when you fly paint in fleets, basically just paint the primaries, because there's no point painting something that your fleet's not going to shoot. Right, so webs, you'll know what webs are. Hopefully they just slow the enemy down. That's it. There's nothing too special about them. One particularly useful use for webs is that you can web capital ships into warp. So, if... I'm not going to get too deep into it, but you can help capital ships warp around faster by webbing them. There is a special type of web called a Stasis Grappler instead of a Stasis Webifier. These are battleship and up modules, and basically they're just webs on steroids. They can slow up to 85% if the target is really close to you, and then the farther away the target is from you, the less effective it is. And the ships that get bonus to this, so I already linked it before, but the Tech 2 Minmatar EWAR gets a bonus to webs, the Hyena, just to the range. And then there's actually also two other classes of ships that get these bonuses, or get similar bonuses. The first is Serpentis line pirate ships, like this Daredevil. If you click on it and go to the traits, you can see that it gets a bonus to Stasis Webifier effectiveness, which just means strength. So webs that you put on these ships slow by a huge amount. Like I think a Tech 2 web with maximum skills on a Serpentis ship slows the target by 90%. And that's crazy, because that's even stronger than a Scram in terms of slow amount, and they're basically immobile. I know that with some faction webs you can get that up to like 95 or something %, which again, they're not moving at all at that point. The other line of ships that gets bonuses is the, if I can find it, the Blood Raiders. So here's one of their ships, the Cruor. This one just gets a bonus to range, not strength. Oh, is it you need abyssals to get past 90? Okay, I must have remembered wrong. Ah, right. All right, any questions about webs? Cool. Yep. All right, gonna go ahead and move on to the next one. Next topic is going to be weapon disruption and missile disruption. I'm going to link these two in fleet. Now these are a little bit different from the ones so far in that these actually have two different effects, and you can run scripts in them to increase the effect of one or the other. So I'm going to link those as well, and I'm going to explain each of them. We'll start off with the guidance disruptor. This one affects missiles. If you use this on a target without a script, then it will decrease the target's missile range and missile explosion velocity and the explosion radius, which basically means their missiles are not going to shoot as far and they're not going to hit as well. So you can use those two scripts that I've also linked, the precision disruption or the range disruption, to like pick one of the two effects to focus on. So if you have the precision script, it'll make their missiles apply a lot worse, but it won't affect their missile range, and vice versa for the missile range disruption. Then there's the tracking disruptor, which is just the turret version of the guidance disruptor. It can either lower their weapon optimal range, or it can lower their tracking speed. So either they can't shoot as far, or they can't track as well. And again, you can run it without a script to have a small effect on both, or you can run it with the script to have a large effect on one. Now the ships that get bonused to this are Amar. This is the Amar Tech 1 EWAR. And the ship, I believe, is the Crucifier, if I can find it. Yeah, there it is. Crucifier, so it gets bonuses to range and strength of disruptors. I believe Crucifiers are a pretty mainline Nubro EWAR doctrine in Voltron. They're pretty useful in any fleet because if it's like a large fleet fight and you damp down one of the enemy's weapon ranges to like half or less than half, they're completely useless with regards to the rest of the fleet, because they're not going to move the whole fleet to get that one guy in range. So that enemy DPS ship is just useless. This is something you can be very effective with as a new bro in large fleets. Do note that you have to preload the right disruptor because guidance disruptors do nothing to turrets and tracking disruptors do nothing to missiles. But I would say in any large fight you can just count on it being guns and not missiles. Any questions about disruption? In most cases, range is better for both weapon and missiles, just because, I mean, range is generally more important. In some cases, tracking and precision can be useful if the enemy kind of already has some problems hitting you. Then if you disrupt them even further, basically they'll never hit you. Like if you're in a frigate, you're going up against maybe an arty cruiser or going up against a battleship or something, and you tracking or precision disrupt them, they'll do no damage to you, basically. Any other questions? All right, moving on to the next one. It is the EMAR Tech 2 EWAR, which is neutralizers and Nosferatus. These both, oh, let me link them. So what these do is they remove the enemy's capacitor. I'm assuming you guys all know what capacitor is, and when you activate this module on an enemy, the neutralizer will just delete part of their capacitor. The Nosferatu will steal a part of their capacitor if you have a lower capacitor level than your enemy. It won't work if you have more cap, with one exception that I'll explain later. But basically, this is the this is the EMAR Tech 2 cap warfare. Neuting out the enemy has a ton of effects on them. You know, if you completely neut them out, they can't activate any hardeners, they can't activate any reppers, they can't use their prop mod. Sometimes they can't use their guns. So it's just, it really is, it totally makes them helpless if you completely neut them out. Keep in mind though that even with zero capacitor, they can still warp. They just won't warp very far. But this won't stop them from warping. Let's see, so the ships that get bonus to this is the EMAR Tech 2 EWAR frigate, which is the Sentinel. Linked it there. So I get bonuses to Newts and Nosses. It's pretty nasty, really, when you get a Tech 2 EMAR ship with Newts and Nosses. They neutralize a huge amount with those bonuses, and they can use them out really, really far. They're particularly useful when you're fighting caps, because neuting out enemy caps basically kills them completely. They can't shield rep, they can't hardener, and you can help with that in a ship as small as a frigate. There is one other, two other ship lines that get bonuses. Oh, no, just one. It's the Blood Raiders, I believe, again. So if you look back at the Cruor, at the ship bonuses, it gets bonuses to the Nos and Newt strength. But it also has one other special effect, which is what I mentioned earlier. If you look at the roll bonus, it says Energy Nosferatu will drain targeted ship's capacitor regardless of your own capacitor level. This means that the Nos will always steal cap from them even if you have more than them. That basically means that the Nos is, you know, it always neuts them out, but it also adds you to your cap. So that makes this particular ship line pretty powerful in terms of capacitor. They can neut you out, they can steal your cap, and they themselves are pretty cap stable because they're stealing yours, no matter how much cap you have. There is one sort of counter to cap warfare, which is just have more cap. But also in certain modules, like this cap battery that I've linked, if you look at the attributes, it says capacitor warfare resistance bonus minus 22%. That means that if you have this module and someone tries to NOS or neut you, their NOS or neut will be 22% less effective. So they just neut or NOS a smaller amount. So cap batteries, you know, of course, their primary effect is increasing their cap, but they also help you against enemy EWAR. Any questions about newts and nosses? That kind of depends. Usually yes, because Logi heavily relies on cap, but on certain ships like Ospreys and Bazzies, since they're cap chaining, it'll be really, really difficult to nuke them out. So if it's cap chaining enemies, go for someone else. But yeah, generally the Logi is a pretty good target because they need their cap to rep. Any other questions? All right, next one, and we're almost done here. Just two more to go. The last one is something that everyone should be familiar with. It's the point and the scram. Both linked in fleet there. What this module does is if you apply it on a target and you're in range, then they cannot warp. And that's all the Disruptor does. But if you look at the Scrambler, it also, in addition to preventing them from warping, it also shuts down their micro warp drive if they have one active. And it will also prevent them from activating a micro jump field generator, which is the command desi boosh. And also, it will prevent them from being booshed by any other command desi. Also, it will shut down any local micro jump drives like battlecruisers or battleships have. So the point is kind of, you use it when you don't want enemies to warp, but the scram really holds them in place. Like if you scram them, the most they can do to escape is just burn slowly in a certain direction. Let's see. Yeah, so there's also another difference in terms of disruption. If you look at the warp disruptor at the attributes, it says warp scramble strength is 1 at the bottom. If you look at the warp scrambler, it says the warp scramble strength is 2. Now, in most cases, this won't make a difference. But where it does make a difference is if the enemy has warp core stabilizers, which kind of act as a counter to points and scrams. And the way that that's calculated is just every ship has a default warp strength of 0, which is, well, with the exception of DSTs, those have a base of 2, but most ships have a base of 0. If you have 0 points or above, you can warp. Every time you get pointed, you lose 1 point. Every time you get scrammed, you lose 2 points. For every warp core stabilizer you have, you gain 1 point. So if you have one stabilizer and someone applies 1 point to you, you can still warp. But if they scram you and you only have one stabilizer, you cannot warp. There's also faction scrams will apply 3 points instead of 2. And there are also special heavy versions of these, which I'll link here. That's the heavy disruptor and the heavy scrambler, and these are battleship and above, kind of like the heavy grappler. Battleship and above, and basically they have a bit longer range, and they have a lot more strength. Like you see the heavy point has 3 points, and the heavy scram has, 6. So they're basically equal to 3 standard points or scrams each. Now the ships that are bonus to this is Galente Tech 2. Let's see if I can link it here. That's the carries. If you look at the bonuses there, they get a pretty large bonus to point and scram range and a reduction activation cost, but that doesn't matter. So basically these ships can point or scram out to a pretty long range. They're good tackle ships. There is also another line, which is the Mordu's Legion ships, like this Garmer. This one also gets a pretty large bonus to point and scram range. And that's the main purpose of the Mordu's Legion ships. They just kite and tackle stuff. Any questions about points and scrams? Yes. Yeah, the Disruptor Tech 2 is 24 kilometers, and the Tech 2 Scram is 10, I think. So you kind of trade, if you pick a Scram, you trade some range for better strength. Any other questions? All right, on to the last one. I know there's been a lot of different things, but there's just that many types of EWAR. So the last one is sensor damping, and this is kind of like the disruptors, where the base module gives two different effects, and you can script it to enhance one effect and forego the other. The sensor dampener, basically, one effect is to reduce the targeting range of enemies. So it's not their weapon optimal range like the weapon disruptor, but if you damp them here, they just can't target you, like it reduces their maximum targeting range. And the other effect is to reduce scan resolution, so it makes them take a lot longer to lock things. And I linked the two scripts there. You can script it to only focus on the scan res or only focus on the targeting range. Now, with the damp, it's kind of a moot point which script you use because the scan res script is garbage. Basically, if you run a damp, just run range damps. There's not really any reason to run scan res damps because it's pretty useless. If you think about it, just making enemies slower to lock stuff is not particularly useful in a fight. Sometimes it's useful if you want to damp the scan res of enemy logi, so it makes them respond slower to damage to their fleet. But other than that, not particularly useful. The ship that's bonus to this is the Calente Tech 1 ships, the Mollis. There it is, gets bonus to range and strength of damps. And that's it for damps. Any questions about damps? It's the scan res that's not really worth it. Unless, with the exception of like if you're trying to damp enemy logi so they can't lock as fast. That's pretty much the only useful use I can think for it. All right, keep in mind that with all of these ships that I've linked, there are cruiser versions of them. Every single race has Tech 1 and Tech 2 frigates for EWAR and Tech 1 and Tech 2 cruisers for EWAR. And the cruisers all have, they're basically just their cruiser versions of the frigate ones. They have basically the same bonuses, but they're a lot stronger, a lot more health. They usually have weapons on them as well, and they're usually better at what they do. Let's see, there is one last type that I'm not going to go over in this class, which is bubbles, interdiction bubbles. That is it's a pretty complicated topic if you really want to get into it, so that's saved for another class. But basically, if you're inside a bubble, you cannot warp anywhere, and bubbles can stop you from warping, can you stop you mid-warp if they're placed correctly. That's all I'm going to say about those in this class. And that is all the types of EWAR in EVE. So that was a lot of stuff, and I don't really expect to remember every single thing. Just kind of keep getting a feel for them. Try out each ship to see what you like. People kind of like different types of EWAR. I know some people who just really love flying NOS and Newt ships because they like capping out their enemies. Other people just like to web or paint, whatever. Find your own playstyle with it. So that's going to be it for this class.